Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in A-Level Law. This lesson is continuing talking about the nature of law in the English legal system, specifically focusing on Parliament. So, the majority of the nature and law and English legal system module topic is going to be concerned with the nature of Parliament in one way or another. The way Parliament makes laws, the way Parliament creates delegated legislation, the concept of parliamentary sovereignty. And so we're going to spend a good few lessons talking not only about Parliament in terms of its structure, but we'll also talk about how Parliament makes law, how Parliament makes secondary law, how secondary law actually works, and then we will move on to talking about the ways in which the courts interpret these laws and apply these laws using the principles of precedent. So, we're moving on in this lesson to look at the process of parliamentary lawmaking, an introduction specifically to Parliament within the English legal system. We will explain the significance, the structure, and the composition to the process of lawmaking in general, but specifically the process of lawmaking through the imposition of the legislature in England and Wales, the primary legislature being, of course, that of Parliament, the parliamentary system. So, beginning first then, what is the parliamentary system and how does the parliamentary system operate? Well, the Parliament of the United Kingdom is described as the most supreme legislative body of the United Kingdom. It is also, in addition to this, one of the oldest legislative systems in the world, described here as one of the oldest continuous representative assemblies in the world, and that's true. But for the UK specifically, it is the supreme legislative body. And this enshrines a very important constitutional principle, a constitutional principle that we are going to explore in more detail in future lessons, but I will just touch on it very briefly here. This is the constitutional principle of parliamentary sovereignty. Fundamentally, Parliament can make and unmake any law she chooses to do. She chooses to make and unmake. And this is obviously done through the imposition of members of Parliament and through the use of MPs in the legislative process. But what this essentially means is that because we have no single codified document that we call the UK Constitution, our Constitution is uncodified, it means that there is no document that we refer to as being representative of the entrenched higher law that is essentially the law of the land, like that you get in the United States. So if you think to the United States, for example, and those of you who are studying A-level politics as well might actually be interested in looking at the US politics as well, because that'll be part of your exams. Essentially, with the US political system, the Constitution of the United States is the supreme authority, such that Congress, the legislative branch in the US, or at least in the at the federal level, has to pass legislation that is in line with what the Constitution says. That doesn't exist in the parliamentary system in the UK. In the UK, our system fundamentally requires that Parliament is sovereign and that Parliament can make and unmake any laws they so choose. In terms of the structure of Parliament, we say that Parliament is what we call a bicameral legislature or a bicameral institution. This means that it has two houses. It is split into two chambers. We have the House of Commons on the one hand, and we have the House of Lords on the other. You also have the third component that is sort of attached onto the end, which is Parliament, but Parliament doesn't represent its own chamber within, the monarchy. The monarchy doesn't represent its own chamber within Parliament. You have the monarch as being the sort of institution that represents the final stamp of approval that is given to a piece of legislation through the use of royal assent, something that we'll get to, as I've mentioned, in a future lesson. Beginning first, then, with the concept of the House of Commons. Now, the House of Commons is the elected lower house of Parliament. Now, unlike with Congress in the United States, we do have what we would describe as a lower house and an upper house, But these two houses, one being lower and the other being upper, don't actually represent any kind of meaningful explanation of the relative power imbalance between the two. In the US, for example, Congress is divided into the lower House of Representatives and the higher Senate, the upper house being the Senate. Now, in America, that's because the House of Representatives is less powerful than that of the Senate in a number of significant ways. However, with the House of Commons and the House of Lords, it's the case that the House of Commons is significantly more powerful, despite being the lower elected house, and that's partially due to a number of historical reasons. The historical reasons being that the House of Lords used to be a lot more powerful, but our history has sort of developed in such a way that has led to the House of Commons gaining more power, with things like the English Civil War and the execution of Charles I and the sort of restoration of the monarchy in the 1600s, all of which contributing to the House of Commons gaining more and more authority and power in time. The House of Commons is made up of members of Parliament, MPs, each representing a geographical constituency. There are 650 constituencies in the United Kingdom, and so therefore there are 650 members of Parliament. Members of Parliament are elected through a general election process, which uses the first-past-the-post election system. This is where essentially the candidate has to just win the most votes in a constituency, sometimes known as a plurality of votes. A general election is held at least every 5 or so years, although they could be called earlier through the use of what is known as a snap election. MPs could also be elected through what are known as by-elections, which is essentially where, let's say, a member of Parliament dies or a member of Parliament resigns or retires prior to the sort of 5-year point at which there is a general election. They'll hold a special election in that specific constituency, and that's known as a by-election. The House of Commons is considered to be the primary legislative body in the United Kingdom. Most bills are introduced and debated through the House of Commons, and after passing through the various stages of scrutiny and debate in the House of Commons, the bill is then sent to the House of Lords. Again, this is something that we'll look at in the next lesson in more detail. So, by contrast then, the House of Lords is seen as, or at least described to be, the upper house of Parliament. Its members are known as lords or peers, and they fall into a number of different categories. You have what are known as life peers. Life peers are appointed for their life by the monarchy on the advance of the Prime Minister. So the use of the monarch essentially as through the royal prerogative under the authority of the Prime Minister essentially means that the monarch doesn't actually appoint peers to the House of Lords. It's actually technically, or in more reality, it is the Prime Minister who passes and who will appoint peers to the House of Lords. But they do so under the auspices of power, which is enshrined through the royal prerogative, which is obviously granted to the government by the monarch. Life peers also constitute a majority in the House of Lords and are appointed usually for their expertise and their experiences and their contribution to public life. So the traditional way in which the House of Lords was seen and viewed was that it would be lawyers, ex-judges, doctors, economists, scientists, all of which are going to have a great ample amount of experience in terms of a specific policy and public life areas, such that if they're passing a piece of legislation on health policy, you would have an economist, a health economist, and a doctor and a practitioner who has experience in that area, who can then contribute to the wording of particular parts of the legislation. That's the sort of general one of the general aims of the House of Lords. However, in addition to life peers, you also have hereditary peers, who are being stamped out at an increasing rate as a result of the new Labour government, in fact. They are members of the House of Lords who will actually inherit their titles. So their dad will be a lord, and they will have a membership to the House of Lords. And when their dad dies, they become a lord, and then they become able to have membership of the House of Lords. Obviously, it is the members of the aristocracy and the members of the nobility that have this hereditary peerage system imposed. But like I said, they are essentially being hounded out in increasing numbers. So, for example, after the 1999 House of Lords Act, they reduced the number of hereditary peers to that of 92. And in addition to that, there has been discussion and ideas around reducing the hereditary peers all the way down to 0 as the result of the election of Sir Keir Starmer a few months ago. There are also Lords Spiritual. These represent the 26 bishops of the Church of England, who also will sit in the House of Lords. I believe there are also other religious denominations that exist in the House of Lords now. I believe there is people who are of Jewish faith and potentially Muslim faith as well, who are able to sit in the House of Lords too. So those are the sort of two major institutions, the two branches of Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. But there are also what are known as parliamentary committees. These are vital to the process through which scrutiny and legislation creation can be achieved. There are a number of different types of committees that exist in Parliament. These include committees that are select committees, in which they scrutinise the work of government. These will be essentially established for both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. They're usually organised around government departments. So, for example, there'll be select committees for the Treasury or for Foreign Affairs or for Education. And they will often investigate specific areas of policy, hence why they're called select committees. They're very selective in terms of what they actually investigate. You have the Public Accounts Committee, which is a committee by the House of Commons that examines public spending and ensures essentially that the funds are being effectively used and efficiently used. This is a House of Commons only committee because the House of Commons is the only branch of Parliament that is elected by the people, and given that money is being spent, taxpayers' money, it is obviously the case that it should be the case, at least, that people who are spending money on their taxes have a say in understanding the public accounts committees, and so that's why it is only the elected House of Commons that investigates the public accounts system. Joint committees also consist of members from both the House of Commons and House of Lords, hence why they're called joint committees. They will deal with matters which affect both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. This includes things like human rights, statutory instruments, and sort of big constitutional pieces of legislation, in addition to things that relate to things like the royal prerogative, for example.